You sleep, but wake up tired. You work all day, yet it feels like you've accomplished nothing. Your body is healthy, but your mind is exhausted. And no one has told you the real reason why. There's a hidden truth behind your fatigue, a truth that isn't in your body, but in a part of you that you don't even notice. Your unconscious mind might be draining your energy every single day, and you have no idea. If you feel like you're living on autopilot with no energy, this video is for you. Stay until the end and discover why resting doesn't solve the problem, and what's really draining you. Some people wake up feeling like the day has barely begun and they're already at their limit. The body gets up, but the mind remains heavy. The simplest tasks seem to require disproportionate effort, and even after a full night's sleep, fatigue persists, as if it never left. Most intriguing is when medical tests show everything is fine. No abnormalities, no disease. Still, something seems wrong, as if your vital energy is being drained without any apparent explanation. It's like standing in front of a machine in perfect working condition, but it simply doesn't respond as it should. You try to find explanations. Is it stress? Vitamin deficiency? Problems with your routine? And yet, even while taking care of your health, diet, and even sleep, the fatigue remains present, silent, and persistent. This creates a subtle discomfort, a doubt that lingers in your thoughts. If my body is healthy, why do I feel so drained inside? And it's at this point that we begin to realize that perhaps the source of this exhaustion is not in the physical body. Maybe there's a deeper layer of the mind silently operating, interfering with your well-being without you noticing. Something that doesn't show up in lab tests, but influences every aspect of your daily life. A part of you that acts without asking permission, and that might be operating at this very moment, even as you read these words. The answer to this feeling might be where almost no one looks. Imagine for a moment that the real thief of your energy isn't something external, like work, routine, or too many tasks, but rather an internal, silent, and unknown part, an invisible structure that operates automatically, directing thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without you noticing. We're talking about the unconscious. A mysterious territory that holds everything you've experienced, felt, and couldn't process. And it's precisely here that one of the greatest enigmas of the human mind resides. The unconscious doesn't ask if it can act. It simply does. It stores old memories, beliefs formed in childhood, forgotten traumas, repressed desires, and even behavioral patterns that repeat without explanation. It influences choices, moods, relationships, and yes, your energy level too. Have you ever felt that emotional weight without knowing where it comes from? That feeling of being drained from within, even without physical exertion? It's as if something were operating behind the scenes and consuming more than you can replenish. Of course, this functioning isn't visible to the naked eye, but it begins to reveal itself in small things, in the lack of motivation to start the day, in the difficulty making decisions, in the feeling of always chasing after something you can't identify. Gradually, this silent presence becomes a constant shadow. And the most challenging part is that you can spend your entire life trying to fix what's visible without realizing that the real problem lies in the hidden part of your mind. And this is where we begin to enter deeper and more surprising territory. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and one of the founders of depth psychology, compared the human mind to an iceberg. The part we can see, our conscious thoughts, our rational actions, represents only the tip. Everything else, what's submerged, forms the unconscious. It's in this hidden layer that powerful forces reside, silently operating in every choice, every reaction, every impulse. It's not something mystical or fantastical, but a real deep structure that influences our daily lives even without us realizing it. Jung said that this unconscious is like a director backstage in a theatrical production. The audience only sees the actors on stage, but who controls the lights, the scenery, the effects, is hidden. And it's precisely this invisible director who might be determining how you feel without you even perceiving its presence. When something is disorganized down there, like unprocessed memories or repressed emotions, the result can be constant wear and tear, a feeling of heaviness, of mental exhaustion that has no apparent explanation. The fatigue then isn't physical, it's psychic. The most intriguing thing is that even while invisible, the unconscious leaves traces, confusing dreams, impulsive attitudes, emotional blockages. All these can be signs that something inside you is trying to communicate. But ignoring these signs is like putting a sticker over the warning light on your car's dashboard. The problem is still there, only now you can't see it anymore. And the more time passes, the more the wear and tear accumulates. But Jung went beyond. He discovered that within the unconscious, there are even more specific areas that might be at the center of your chronic fatigue. Jung introduced a powerful concept called the shadow. The shadow represents everything we hide from ourselves: fears, frustrations, impulses, traumas, and desires that don't fit the image we want to maintain in front of the world. These are parts of our being that have been repressed, whether out of shame, fear, or social pressure. And the more these parts are pushed into the unconscious, the more energy the mind needs to spend to keep them below the surface. It's like trying to keep a ball submerged in water all the time. It requires constant effort. This attempt to deny or repress certain aspects of personality doesn't come without cost. Every time you ignore a legitimate emotion, like anger, sadness, or fear, you spend psychic energy to keep that emotion out of the conscious field. This wear and tear is subtle, but continuous. Over time, it accumulates and transforms into a deep fatigue that isn't relieved by physical rest. And it's here that many people get confused, treating the symptom with more productivity, more coffee, or more effort, which only silently worsens the situation. Think about how many times you've held back tears, pretended to be fine, smiled, while inside you were falling apart. Each of these acts requires enormous internal strength. Now imagine doing this for years. The shadow doesn't disappear when ignored, it only becomes heavier. Jung stated that confronting the shadow is an essential step for psychic integrity, but few have the courage to look inward and face what they've repressed for so long. And the price of running away tends to be high, much more than just the fatigue that prevents you from living fully. Keeping a secret takes effort. Remember that feeling of always being alert, careful about what you say, afraid of being discovered? Now imagine that same type of effort happening inside your mind, but with content you don't even know is there. Parts of you, unresolved emotions, painful memories, denied desires, are being forcibly kept in the unconscious. This consumes energy, even if invisibly, and it's this psychic energy that gradually drains away, leaving a feeling of fatigue that doesn't go away. This internal wear and tear is silent but brutal. It's like leaving several apps running in the background on your phone. You don't see them, but the battery drains quickly. Similarly, the unconscious continues operating all the time, trying to keep under control everything you don't want to face. And the problem is that it doesn't have a pause button. It works 24 hours a day, even during sleep. In fact, dreams are one of the ways it tries to relieve the pressure, but often you don't even remember them when you wake up. This type of energy consumption doesn't show up in medical tests, but it's reflected in constant feelings of exhaustion, anxiety, and even apathy. You can watch your diet, exercise, get the recommended 8 hours of sleep, and still feel empty. This happens because what's draining you isn't physical, but emotional and psychic. It's a continuous effort of denial, repression, and adaptation that you don't even notice anymore. And the worst part, the more you try to adapt, the more energy you lose. And then signs start to appear that something needs to be looked at more carefully. The unconscious doesn't always reveal itself through major crises. Sometimes it gives small signs, subtle but persistent, like that procrastination that appears for no reason, precisely when you most need to be productive, or that fatigue that doesn't improve, even after an entire weekend of rest. There are also strange dreams full of confusing symbolism and that constant feeling of carrying an emotional weight that you can't explain. All of this might be the unconscious trying to communicate, but most people prefer to ignore it. When these signs appear, they aren't the problem itself. They're symptoms of something deeper. Imagine an old house. If cracks start to appear in the walls, you might cover them with putty and paint, but if the foundation is compromised, the cracks will return. That's how the mind works. Taking an energy drink, making another to-do list, or seeking motivation on Instagram might mask the problem, but it doesn't solve it. The unconscious continues operating, pulling energy and trying to get your attention, even if you're too busy to notice. These signs tend to appear at specific moments when you try to change your life, when you approach something important, or when you start questioning the direction of things. And it's at this moment that the unconscious stirs. Not because it wants to sabotage you, but because it's full of repressed material that is afraid to come to the surface. And this fear, this silent apprehension, manifests as blockage, anxiety, fatigue, or a nameless discomfort. And the more you insist on ignoring it, the louder it screams. But there's a specific factor that amplifies this invisible drain even more. Imagine having to wear a heavy uniform every day, even when it no longer fits you. That's more or less what happens with the persona, a Jung concept that represents the social mask we wear to be accepted. We all have one: the competent professional, the obedient child, the cheerful and resilient person. But when this mask distances itself too much from who we really are, it begins to weigh us down. And maintaining this image requires an immense, silent effort, which is often confused with ordinary fatigue. The persona isn't something inherently bad. It helps us live in society. But when it becomes an unbreakable armor, it begins to hide, suffocate, and distort what we really feel and think. It's like playing a character full-time, never being able to leave the stage. Over time, the emotional cost of this performance accumulates, and the most curious thing is that the more successful your social image appears, the more tired you may feel inside, because the effort to maintain appearances often exceeds what you can handle. This discrepancy between what you show and what you really are creates a type of fatigue that no rest can resolve. It's like living in constant performance, avoiding any slip that might reveal your vulnerability. And the more demanding the persona, the greater the internal abyss. People who live under the pressure of being strong all the time, for example, tend to be those who suffer the most in silence. This rigid role, when maintained for too long, feeds a psychic conflict that drains energy without you noticing. And this conflict begins to deepen. Living in internal conflict is like trying to run with the parking brake on. On the outside, everything seems to be working. You work, socialize, deliver results, but inside there's a constant wear and tear between the real self and the ideal self. The first carries your truths, your pains, your limits. The second carries expectations, demands, and the need to please. When these two sides clash, the mind divides, and this division consumes energy. It's not a lack of willpower. It's the weight of sustaining an identity that doesn't match your essence. This conflict manifests in subtle ways: irritability without reason, feeling empty even in good moments, existential crises that come out of nowhere. It's the unconscious trying to show that something isn't aligned. A person who, for example, always acts as a peacemaker, even when they want to scream, accumulates frustration. Another who forces themselves to smile, even while experiencing internal grief, accumulates pain. And this accumulation, sooner or later, bursts, not in a great collapse, but in a fatigue that has no apparent explanation. The greater the distance between what you feel and what you show, the greater the friction. And this friction not only wears you down, it silences you, silences your will, your spontaneity, your genuine joy. It's like living in an invisible prison where every gesture is rehearsed to keep up appearances. And this constant performance isn't just tiring, it's unsustainable. And the body at some point collects the debt. But before that happens, there's another subtle factor that comes into play: self-sabotage. Silent, disguised, and almost always misunderstood. Self-sabotage doesn't usually arrive with fanfare. It comes disguised as distraction, insecurity, or "I'll do it later." And most curiously, it's not your enemy. It's actually a protection mechanism created by your unconscious. When you approach something that might expose you, confront you, or force you to change, the unconscious turns on the warning signal. It remembers old pains, hidden shame, unresolved fears, and to prevent all this from resurfacing, it prevents you from acting, even if the path is clear. That's why often you feel like you're one step away from accomplishing something important, but you freeze. You sabotage yourself without realizing it. You don't send the resume. You postpone that necessary conversation. You procrastinate on the project that could change your life. And the worst part, you then blame yourself, thinking you lack focus, discipline, willpower, but the hole goes deeper. The truth is that your unconscious is trying to protect you from an internal confrontation that you've avoided for so long. And this defensive effort, although silent, costs dearly. It costs energy, opportunity, life. It's like having your foot on the accelerator, but the unconscious on the brake. The engine heats up, the tank empties, but the car barely moves, and this generates frustration, feelings of inadequacy, and of course more fatigue. The mind enters a repetitive cycle where each attempt at change is sabotaged before it even begins. And you don't even realize you're stuck in this because self-sabotage is subtle. It camouflages itself in your routines, your excuses, your escapes. But all this gets even worse when you insist on handling everything alone. We live in an era where saying, "I can't handle it," seems like a personal failure. The pressure to handle everything, work, home, relationships, appearance, success, is constant. And the problem is that this pressure doesn't always come from outside. Often it's the unconscious itself feeding a toxic sense of obligation. It repeats patterns learned way back. Be strong, don't complain, show results. And even when the body asks for a pause, you force yourself to continue. The mind enters a state of war, and that's when exhaustion stops being physical and becomes existential. This silent self-demand is like carrying a backpack full of invisible stones. You judge yourself for not producing more, for not being more excited, for having lost the sparkle in your eyes. You think you're being weak, but in reality, you're just exhausted from fighting against an internal system that never stops. It's as if there were an internal voice repeating all the time, "You need to hang in there." And the more you demand of yourself, the more your energy disappears. And, to make matters worse, you still blame yourself for being tired. A spiral that takes you to the bottom without anyone noticing. And in this spiral, many people get lost. Because the more they try to handle everything, the less they can access what really matters, what's happening inside. Sometimes it's not laziness, lack of grit, or motivation. It's just an exhausted mental system trying to cry for help in the only way it knows how, through fatigue. And meanwhile, you continue trying to do everything, be everything, solve everything, without realizing that perhaps what you need most right now isn't to do more, but to look at what has been avoided. And this journey begins in a simple but profound way. There comes a time when the body no longer responds. The mind doesn't focus. Pleasure disappears, and even good things seem gray. It's at this point that many people start looking for answers. But what few realize is that the way out isn't outside or in the next course, book, or motivational video. The way out begins in a much less glamorous place, your interior. Face what's hidden, recognize the shadows that have been swept under the rug. It's an invitation to honesty. And, for many, it's also the greatest challenge. Looking inward takes courage. Courage to see what you've tried to forget, to accept that maybe you don't have control over everything, and to understand that the mind has dark corners that don't light up quickly. It's not about sitting and meditating for 5 minutes. It's about investigating, questioning, revisiting memories, facing discomfort. Sometimes it's grabbing a notebook and writing everything that comes to mind without censorship. Sometimes it's seeking therapy, talking to someone who understands the human mind. There's no ready-made recipe because what's inside each person is unique. Most don't follow this path because it's arduous, lonely, and doesn't deliver immediate results. It doesn't give easy answers, nor does it offer shortcuts. But it has something that no external technique can offer: truth. And only when truth begins to appear, energy begins to return. Gradually, like a light that flickers before turning on. But for that, you need the willingness to face what you've spent a lifetime avoiding, because as long as you don't face it, the internal struggle continues. And it's this struggle that keeps fatigue where it is, at the center of your routine. Perhaps now you understand why no rest is enough, why vacations don't solve the problem, why the weekend seems too short, why even sleeping 8 hours leaves that feeling that something still weighs you down. The truth is that you're not just tired of the world, you're tired of yourself, or rather, of the fight you wage every day against parts of yourself that have never been heard. This silent war consumes your vitality without alarm, like a faucet that drips slowly until the reservoir dries up. And the cruelest part is that no one sees it. You smile, work, fulfill your obligations, but inside you feel drained. And the more you try to compensate for this with productivity, the more the mind screams for relief. But this relief doesn't come from outside. It only arrives when you stop warring with yourself, when you understand that you don't need to overcome what you feel, but rather listen to it. Exhaustion isn't a defect nor weakness. It's a warning, a call, and ignoring this call is continuing on a road that doesn't lead forward. It just repeats the same potholes. So the next time you ask yourself, "Why am I so tired?" perhaps the right question is, "What am I fighting against inside myself?" And when this realization hits, everything changes, not all at once, but it begins, and just beginning. You already feel that something different is pulsing, because the hardest weight to carry was never the external one, it was always the internal one. And only those who have the courage to face this will finally find a rest that doesn't come from the pillow, but from peace, the kind that only arrives when the war ceases. If this content made sense to you, if it helped you in some way, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. There's a lot of powerful stuff coming, and you won't want to miss it. And if you want to deepen this understanding even more, click on the video that's appearing on the screen now. It will expand your vision even further about what's preventing you from living with lightness. Take care of yourself, for real, because no one else can do it for you.